Thank you for coming to the Equity Network webinar tonight on Secrets to Strong Writing for Professionals. My name is Christina Foles. I am the senior writer here at AAUW. I've been here for almost 2 years. I work on writing for our digital communications, for the website. I work on the Equity Express newsletter, which some of you may get. That's one of the things that I've had a fun time creating and working on. And I've been working in writing and editing roles in nonprofits for more than 20 years. And on the volunteer side, I also work for an organization called Association Media and Publishing as the president of that organization. So it's something that I feel passionately about, and I'm really excited to be here tonight. And I'm also very happy to be co-presenting with my colleague Mary Hickey. So Mary, why don't you say a few words now?
Sure. Hi, I'm Mary Hickey. My job at AAUW is the Senior Director of Communications, and I write op-eds for our CEO. I write reports. I write press releases. I've been a journalist for many, many years. I've spent most of my career in the magazine world in New York. As an editor and a writer. I've also taught writing and journalism. I was an adjunct professor at NYU for 10 years, and I taught plain writing skills to federal employees. And this is the first time I've ever done it on Zoom. So I'm thrilled to be here and eager to talk about writing and why it's so important. Especially right now. Writing, as you know, is a way you present yourself, present your ideas, and at a time when we're not meeting people in person, it's especially important that we know how to write and communicate effectively. Nakia?
Thank you so much, Mary and Christina. Hi, everyone. I am Nakia. I'm the Engagement Associate here at AAUW. Welcome to another Equity Network webinar. I just want to let you all know that tonight's session is being recorded and will be available on our website next week. Just know that you can revisit any session at any time by going to the Equity Network page of our website, and that is aauw.org. You'll also find updates and information on all of our upcoming programs, so be sure to check those out as well. And mark your calendars because we do have some really cool stuff coming. If this is your first Equity Network webinar, welcome. I'm glad you're able to join us. Just here to learn and boost your professional development, because whether you're on your campus or in your workplace or in your community, we want you to be empowered to champion equity for all, for everyone, virtually and in person. I say this a lot, but I really do hope that these sessions are helpful. So if you have any ideas or suggestions for webinar, just shoot me an email at equity@aauw.org. Again, that's equity@aauw.org. Or just respond to the brief survey I'll be sending out to all attendees tomorrow. With that, I'm going to turn this back over to Christina, who will be kicking off today's program. Thank you all, and please enjoy.
Thank you, Nakia. And Tremaine, can we have the first slide? Okay, so I'm going to give a quick overview of what we're going to talk about today, why you need to write well, and really that, as Mary alluded to, it's something that's so important to presenting yourself in a professional manner, no matter what you do, what line of work you're in. I think most people have had experience where you're reading someone's resume or cover letter and there can be one typo or one inconsistency, and it really throws you off and makes an impression that you don't want. And so we want to give people the skills they need to be able to present their ideas clearly and persuasively. And the crux of what we're going to talk about is something called plain writing, which Mary also mentioned. It's really about being clear, concise, and well organized in your writing and helping people to find what they need quickly so they don't have to read something multiple times, but just can get the ideas very quickly and easily. The average American has a reading level of 8th grade or less, and so I think sometimes we forget it. It's the baseline is fairly fundamental, and trying to communicate clearly is what we're going for. We're also going to go over how to do specific forms of professional writing, cover letters, emails, which is one of the biggest ways that people in the workplace communicate, public-facing writing, you can use writing for advocacy purposes, and then we're going to field your questions. So let's go to the next slide, and Mary, you can take that one.
So writing is kind of the end product. The starting point is clear thinking. And before you sit down to write, it's really crucial that you think about what you want to say, why you want to say it, what your goal is, and who your audience is. The better you understand what you're trying to say before you put a pen to paper or touch your keypad, the clearer your writing will be. So kind of think about what you want to say. Make sure it's something you can say fairly clearly, simply, and easily. Your tone will vary depending on your audience. Your writing will have different goals. Are you writing to explain things to people? Are you writing to introduce yourself to people? Are you writing to persuade people? And just having a sense of what your goals are and thinking about them before you even begin is really crucial. Know that you want to convey a main idea. You don't want to tell the world everything there is to know. You really want to have one clear, concise, thought out message that you want to deliver. Writing as a professional is very different from writing in school. In school, you write papers and you write research, and you sort of have page length requirements, and so you tend to get wordy. Writing in the professional world is very different, and so you want to keep that in mind. Your number one goal as a writer is to make your writing engaging and easy to understand. You don't want to overwhelm a reader with just a lot of material, a lot of information. Short is almost always better. Concise is better. And when we say short, we don't only mean a short finished product, but short sentences. You really want to keep your sentences 25 words is kind of as maximum you want to go. You want to look for ways, if something is going on, you want to look for ways to break it into 2 sentences. You really want to keep it easy and flowing, and you don't want to have people to have to sort of stop as they're reading your work to figure out what you're trying to say. You want it to be effortless. The other thing that I think is super important for professionals is to avoid affectation. A lot of times in the work world, people write to sort of sound impressive or to show what they know, and they rely on jargon and they rely on sort of businessy terms that are not really, they're just kind of pretentious and affected. You really don't want to try to sound smart or authoritative. You want to sound authentic. You want to be yourself. You want to use everyday words, and you want to write in a way that you would speak. You really don't want to throw out words that you wouldn't be comfortable saying. It just doesn't feel authentic. So your aim is to keep your language clear, simple, and use everyday words. And you can do that and convey the most complicated ideas, but you can keep it as simple and straightforward as possible. Again, minimize jargon. I mean, that is really something I see tons of times in professional communications. People will use these jargony terms, and I'll sort of think, oh, what does that mean? Same with acronyms, and especially for those of us here in Washington, there's an acronym for everything, and you can't assume that people know what they mean. So you really want to keep it clear and simple. So this is a rule that writers live by. It's called the KISS rule. Keep it short and simple. And if you remember that and just kind of think as you're writing something, am I adhering to the KISS rule? You're probably in good shape. You want to just keep it short, simple, plain language, no affectation. no pretension, and just be your authentic self in writing. You're communicating your professional identity, you're letting people know who you are, and good writing is just probably the most impressive skill that you can have as a professional, and it really can get you very far in terms of being able to communicate your ideas and being able to convey your thoughts and your opinions. So keep the KISS rule in mind. And now we're going to go back to Christina, who's going to go do a sort of deeper dive into some of the real fundamentals of plain writing.
Okay, so we are going to get into some of the nuts and bolts of this type of writing. And I think before I start talking about them, I just want to say that I think what these 7 rules have in common is the focus on clarity and simplicity. One of the misconceptions that people have about plain writing is that it's about dumbing down or being simplistic. And in fact, it's actually a lot of work. It's a lot easier to rely on jargon and big words and flowery sentences than it is to explain something simply and clearly. So you might have heard the expression hard writing makes easy reading. So usually when something's really simple and clear and understandable, it's because you've spent the time to understand it and you're helping your reader to understand as well. So you're doing the work so that people who are reading your writing don't have to. And in that way, it's really a form of courteousness. And I think that's one of the ways that it really weaves in with making a good impression professionally, because when you can show somebody that you value their time by being quick, by being clear and telling them, you know, who you are and engaging them in such a way that respects their time, they're going to really think well of you. So I think I did want to also just pass along, there's a website called plainlanguage.gov. It's a government website, and it's actually a federal government initiative to try and make writing more clear and simpler, and it goes through some of the rules that I'm going to talk about in greater detail. Okay, so this is about keeping the key parts of a sentence close together, subject, verb, and object. So some of you might remember from grammar school doing sentence diagramming. It kind of comes back to that. I think in grammar school, the subject is the noun, the predicate is what we call the verb, and the direct object. So it's usually the actor in a sentence, the thing that they're doing, the verb, and then the thing that they're doing it to, or what they're acting on. And so trying to keep those elements close together, again, going back to the idea of how you speak and how you communicate verbally, is a really good rule of thumb. If you look at the first example here, it's grammatically a correct sentence, a rule that will substantially weaken Title IX and roll back important protections for student survivors of sexual assault and sexual harassment and assault, introduced by the Trump administration last week. It's just a lot. It's a lot to unpack. And as a reader, you have to think afterwards, what does that sentence really mean? And so if you go to the second, clearer example, where it just starts off with, last week, the Trump administration issued a rule substantially weakened Title IX, comma, rolling back important protections, et cetera, et cetera. So you just right away get the sense of when this happened, who the actor is, what the action was, and what the direct object is. And it just makes it a lot easier on people. With the second example, this is something I've seen a lot, where you start a sentence with a long list of things and it's not clear to the reader what they are, what they have to do with anything. So if the sentence starts, a universal basic income, emergency funds for marginalized groups, and make co-payments for COVID-19 tests are all part of the feminist economic recovery plan proposed by the state of Hawaii. It's like, wow, that's a lot. As you're reading, you're like, what do these things have to do with each other? And your brain is kind of churning. If you then would rewrite it to just say, the state of Hawaii proposed a feminist economic recovery plan. So the state of the Hawaii is the noun, proposed is the verb, and then the feminist economic recovery plan, and then say what it includes. It just goes much more the way that your brain would think and the way that you would unpack that sentence. Okay, so smothered verbs are something that it's a way to make an noun into a verb, and it sort of weakens the sentence and adds words where you don't necessarily need them. So there's the example of the research team will make an investigation. And it would really be a lot stronger to say the research team will investigate. So there's one word instead of three. Or after making an evaluation of the problem, the committee decided to bring the investigation to a conclusion. Just saying, after evaluating the situation, the committee concluded the investigation. And these are also called hidden verbs, and if you go to that plainlanguage.gov site, you'll see a lot of examples. But I wanted to share one tip for how to identify these types of words, to look for three endings. One is MENT, so something like a payment. If the word ends in MENT, if the word ends in TION, like production versus produce, or SION, like conclusion. So if you go to the next slide, you'll see a lot of examples of the TION, make a contribution. Sorry, can you go to the next slide? I'm looking at the next slide on my own computer and thinking that you guys have access to it too. Here you go. So you'll see plenty of these examples here in the NT word, conduct an assessment, where you can say assess, make a contribution, contribute. And so they all have one of those three endings, MENT, TION, or SION. And if you think about, as you write, editing or going back and looking for little clues like that, you can streamline and make the next version a lot smoother and quicker. So a lot of, I think, what we're going to talk about is not just writing, but actually editing. So after you write something, looking for cues that could make it even easier to understand. And here we just have more examples of how to use simpler words, using the word use instead of utilize or leverage, help instead of facilitate, start instead of commence. I think sometimes this depends a little bit on your audience, because there are some audiences that are more into sophisticated terminologies or specific terminologies. But in general, when you're communicating for professional purposes, the simpler that you can be, the better, and it also helps with clarity. Okay, using the active voice is a key component of plain language. And I'm sure many of you have heard about active voice and how important it is. I do want to say that it can be complicated. It's not that you need to use the active voice all the time. It's helpful to use it most of the time. I would say a good rule is to say 80% of the time to strive to use active voice, and the other 20% using a more passive construction. So how do you know which is which? In general, in most cases, you're going to want to say what the noun is, and this goes back to like what we were just explaining. Just being very clear about how to explain something. So instead of saying the program was used by school administrators, you would go with school administrators used the program. So that's a more active way of saying you're starting the sentence with saying who the actor was and what the verb was, as opposed to a passive form of the verb. The next one is the goal of attaining equitable pay for women is viewed as achievable by AAUW CEO Kim Churches. So again, to just say quickly, AAUW CEO Kim Churches thinks equitable pay for women is an achievable goal. I did want to point out that passive voice does have its uses. It's it comes in handy when you don't know who the actor of a sentence is, or they're irrelevant. The example that is given there is about our Work Smart training, which when we bring it up in our communications, it tends to just be about what the training is, which is that it's a training that's designed to teach women how to negotiate. You don't really need to say a variety of workplace and educational experts and consultants designed Work Smart to teach women how to negotiate, unless you're specifically talking about that concept of who the people were, and that's important. So another example that will maybe make it a little clearer is you would say something like the mail was delivered at 3 p.m. That would be a good use of passive voice, as opposed to saying the mailman delivered the mail at 3 p.m. because it's just not important to the sentence. But in general, it's always better and clearer to use active voice. And when you rely too much on passive voice, sometimes it has the implication that you're trying to hide something, or, I think the classic example is mistakes were made, and hide who did something. And so it's just a lot better and clearer to be as active as you possibly can. Okay, so here are some other unnecessary words. At this point in time can simply be now. A sufficient number is enough. On a monthly basis, just say monthly, in the amount of $10, and in order to, these are great examples of things that it's often very natural in writing to use a lot of words, but to go back and think about, is there a quicker way to say this? And I also wanted to say here, adverbs are something that should be used sparingly. An adverb, you may remember from English 101, is a word that describes a verb. So very, or so, or actually, and you can over rely on them. And in general, it's not that they have a place in writing, but the more sparing you can be with them in general, the better. It's not very helpful, although I just use the word very, to always be amplifying. Usually the main verb will do the job that you need it to do, and you can just get where you need to go quicker without using adverbs. Okay, so then the next slide is about being parallel in your construction when you're writing. So this is thinking about the structure of a sentence. The sentence here, to negotiate effectively, you must be informed, confident in your ability, and know your value. So if you look at the verb there is be, and it should sort of carry through the sentence. So you must be informed, you must be confident in your ability. And if you look at the third one in the first example, it doesn't follow. Like, it's not correct to say you must be know your value. So that just is jarring and not a correct way of saying it. So it would be better to say, to negotiate effectively, you must be informed, confident in your ability, and aware of your value. So looking at the verb that you're using and making sure that if you take the other pieces out, that it makes sense for each part of the sentence. Again, the second example, the course requires thinking, studying, and hard work. I mean, I think technically that's not necessarily wrong, but the first two words are called gerunds, the ing form of a verb. So if you can carry that throughout the sentence, it's just a little more harmonious and parallel, and it makes people feel good to say the course requires thinking, studying, and working hard. And the third is just another example with 3 short sentences using the same construction each time will be very helpful. Okay, this banished word echoes, this is one of the ones that I think people don't think about a lot, and it makes a big difference. It's about not being repetitive within a few sentences, using the same words over and over again. The before example here, the word generous is used in the first sentence, and then the second sentence, right away, AAUW is used multiple times, the word law, the word women and girls. And it's one of those things that people often aren't aware of, as they're writing, but as a reader, sometimes you find you're kind of losing interest in what you're reading, you're getting bored, you're glazing over, and you don't really know why. And part of it can just be the fatigue of reading the same words over and over again. And it really helps a lot when you can reduce that, go back through, and this again goes back to the idea of editing your writing, circling where you're using the same word within a few sentences. I mean, there can be instances where that's a conscious technique that can be effective, but in general, it's usually just the way that our writing comes out because we have certain words in mind. So restructuring sentences so that you can avoid those echoed words is a good way to go. And the other thing I would encourage you to do is to use your thesaurus function in they have one in Word. You can use thesaurus.com online to just look for different ways of expressing different concepts. I remember when I worked for a magazine where we had an article about it was like time tracking technology through mobile phones, and I edited it and realized the first draft, it was like literally 10% of the article was the word mobile. So I was going back and saying, smartphone, tablet, cell phone, digital technology, mobile, and just making those changes will bring the writing to life in a way that can be surprising. And sometimes there's that I don't know why this is jumping out at me and the other thing isn't, when they're both perfectly fine and they're grammatically correct. And sometimes it can be little things like that. So just be mindful of those things. This one you may have heard before. It's also called show, don't tell. In general, when you're writing, it's more effective to be really specific and say what you mean by showing it. So instead of saying the CEO is speaking at an important conference, say what that conference is. The CEO is speaking at a United Nations conference in Geneva where she will announce AAUW's international priorities. So you're giving life to something and saying exactly what it is. And it's a lot more effective because you're not relying on the judgment of somebody that you have never met. And everybody has a different idea of what important means, for example. The second example, the Work Smart online course is very easy to take. Again, it's like, what does that mean? When you say that it takes 2 minutes to download and less than an hour to complete, and that you can take it anywhere at any time, it again brings it to life and just shows you exactly what it means when you say easy to take. And that's generally a much more effective way of communicating, especially in the context of your professional credentials, not just saying you're a problem solver, but giving an example of a problem that you've actually solved and showing, talking people through the before and after and how you were able to do that is going to be a lot more effective in making your case. Okay, and I'm going to turn this back over to Mary. We're going to get into some specific forms of writing now and some general guidelines there. Thank you.
Thank you, Christina. You covered a lot of great material. We're going to get into some of the specifics of writing different kinds of products, but I want to begin where I kind of end in this presentation. But as Christina was talking, I realized how absolutely important a most fundamental thing about writing is. And I will confess that it is a real weakness of mine. That is proofreading your writing to make sure that you don't have typos and misspellings. I have hired a lot of people in my life and have read a lot of cover letters, and I cannot tell you the number of times that a cover letter or a resume has a typo or a misspelling. And I kind of can look past it sometimes, but there are some hiring managers who just will not look past it. So when you write, you want to make sure that you self-edit, and you can do that. When you self-edit, you can kind of observe the rules that Christina mentioned and kind of go through your editing, circling, complex words when you could use a simple one, passive voice. But what happens is when you read your material so many times, you can read right over mistakes. So a couple tricks for that I find very helpful. One, if you read aloud, one word at a time, you will be more prone to see a typo or a misspelling. Another way that I do it is I will blow up the font to maybe 24 points, and I will see a kind of big word, and when you have a typo, it's much more glaring when it's in 24 point font. But the most effective way is to get somebody to read behind you, to get a friend or a family member to look at what you're writing and make sure that it is clean and doesn't have any kind of typo or misspelling in it. And that's something really just so fundamental, and yet no matter how professional we are, no matter how long we've been doing this, we make typos and misspellings and missed words. It's moving into email. It happens a lot in email because email is such a quick, immediate communication that we tend to sort of dash things off. It's fine if you're writing back and forth to a colleague and it's not important, but if you're writing to make an impression, you want to treat email as you would a printed document. It's that important that you make sure that you are not missing words, that you don't have typos. With email, you want to have a clear and compelling subject line, not just like, hi, but about the job you've posted, or something that is very clear and compelling that will make the person know exactly what the email is going to be about. Email is a casual medium, a casual way of communication, but for professional purposes, you don't want to be overly casual. You don't want to use emojis. You don't want to use shortened spellings. You want to make it professional. At the same time, you don't want to make it so formal, like "Dear So-and-so," as if it's an old-fashioned business letter. It might be "Hi, John," or whatever. But don't be overly casual. Again, with email, remember the KISS rule. Keep it short and simple, and get your main point up high. Christina's going to talk a little more about this. She does a lot of emails for AAUW, so she has some inside tips. But two other things. One, be careful when you're attaching something. A lot of filters will filter out material with attachments. And certain filters will not accept certain kind of attachments. So be careful with the attachment. If it's not, if it's a resume, you're going to want to attach it. But it can often be better to link to your LinkedIn profile, or if it's something you can cut and paste into the body of an email, that might be preferable. Finally, if you're sending out an email, be careful how many people you copy or send the email to, because again, spam filters will filter out an email that goes to a long list, and different people have different settings. So it might be, 10 people it's filtered out. You really want to send one email to one person and keep it personal. Okay, Christina, do you want to take over the email discussion?
I was just going to make a real quick additional point. In addition to following the KISS rule, there's something called the BLUF rule, BLUF, and that stands for bottom line up front. This is something that journalists think about a lot, getting the story right there in the first paragraph so people keep reading. It's the same thing with email, especially when you're trying to reach out to somebody who's important, who's got a lot of emails coming to them and a lot of requests. Think about the main thing, the main action you want them to take, the main piece of information you want them to know, and make that your first paragraph. And try to be as simple as possible, as in and out as possible. And it goes back to the idea of being really respectful of people's time. Our CEO likes us to use in the subject line, action required, so that you can know and you can sort your email by what needs your review. So as much as you can, let people know exactly what you want from them as quickly as possible is really helpful with email. People will very much appreciate that.
Okay, so cover letters. We could probably do an entire session on cover letters. So we're really going to cover some of the top line things here. There's a lot of debate over cover letters. Some people say, oh, they're old fashioned, you don't need them. Other people say it's a good idea for a good way for a hiring manager to get a sense of a person. And if you're applying for jobs, you don't know who that person is and what his or her outlook about cover letters is. So you really don't lose anything by having a good, well-crafted cover letter. One thing you want to do is have a template, because you don't want to send the same cover letter to every different job you're applying for. You want to customize every cover letter to every job so you can make sure you're addressing the specifics of the organization, the specifics of the skills they're looking for. So make a template or make 2 templates and have them ready. And then as you apply for a job, very carefully use that template to create a tailored cover letter to the specific job. Again, keep it short and simple, no more than a page. You really want to start by introducing yourself and identifying the specific job you're applying for. Hi, I am a journalist who is applying for a job I saw advertised on Monster, and my resume is attached. Then in the next paragraph, you want to very quickly summarize your skills and experience. Say what you are bringing to the table that maybe another candidate isn't. Really use a paragraph to sell yourself, really to convey that you have the skills and experience. Look to the job description. Use some of the same words that are used in the requirements for a job. Depending on the organization, a lot of hiring managers use people to screen out cover letters and resumes. So you don't want to be screened out. You want to make sure that you're showing that you have the skills, the experience by mimicking the language in the job description. Finally, you want to close your cover letter with just one final paragraph expressing how interested you are in the job, why you're the right fit for the job, and then you saying, I will be in touch. Not, I look forward to hearing from you, but I will follow up in a week. And close it, with whatever salutation or whatever sign you feel comfortable with. Ideally, do not send your resume and cover letter to just some blind person to whom it may concern. Really do a little bit of sleuthing to find out the company, the hiring manager. You can find this all out. It's on, companies and organizations all have sort of about us, and you can get the title of the person who might be hiring. Even if it's wrong, you can email that person and say, I'm not sure this is you. Can you let me know who the right person is? But the more specific you can be about targeting a person rather than just a box, because especially in an environment like this, when the employment situation is so absolutely overloaded, the more you can do to have a specific name. If you can have a connection who can introduce you or tell you about the hiring manager, use LinkedIn. Try to find out as much as you can and really take advantage of that. And then finally, going back to what I said earlier, proofread carefully. More than anything, in a cover letter and resume, that matters. As I said, I've known hiring managers who just absolutely dismiss a resume or cover letter that has a typo in it. Not all do. I think a lot of people are a little more forgiving, but really it is something that could really be a deal breaker. So really spend a lot of time making sure you've got that piece down. So This is, kind of the next level writing for a public-facing audience. Not only writing for a job or an email or professional networking, but writing to raise your profile, writing to advocate for your positions, and writing to kind of get yourself out there in the professional world. Op-eds and letters to the editor are great ways to do this. It's the smaller the publication, the easier it is to place something. If you're trying to write a letter to the New York Times or to the Wall Street Journal, it's not as easy because everybody is writing a ton of stuff. But look at your local publications. Don't dismiss small community papers, and kind of find out what they look for. With letters to the editor, virtually every newspaper or magazine has on its website, an explanation of what they look for. We want the Times, for instance, we want letters of under 300 words, and you send them to letters to the editor at newyorktimes.com. This is not where you look for a name. This is just kind of out there. So with a letter to the editor, and to a similar degree with an op-ed, you really want to respond to something that is in the news. You don't want to just randomly write a letter saying, here's what I think. If you see a story that's related to something that you are interested in or you feel strongly about, use that story as a jumping off point. Remember to have a kind of one main point that you're trying to convey. Keep it simple, keep it focused. The same way with an email, you want your most important point up at the top, and then you want to back it up with reasons that your argument or your point of view makes sense. Learn the preferred length, like for op-eds, which are published by lots of websites and lots of publications. Most of them run around 500, 600 words. You want to kind of follow the same format, have a main point that you're trying to make. A lot of times I hear from writers, how do I write something and have my voice show through if I'm trying to keep it short and simple? And to that, I would say, there are different kinds of writing. If you're doing creative writing, short story writing, humor writing, writing where your voice really matters, that's a completely separate type of writing. And that's not what we're talking about here. We're really focusing on professional writing. And so you don't really need to have your personality and voice show through. You really want to keep it straightforward, simple. You can use personal experience. That's always a good element to have in an op-ed or in a letter to the editor. But you really want it to be very straightforward and simple. And even through that, you will have a voice. Your voice will come through. You don't have to worry about it. You don't have to think, am I conveying my personality? Just focus on your idea, knowing what you want to say. As I said in the beginning, you really want to keep it, your idea, you want to think it out before you write it, then write it in the most clear and engaging way you can. Again, the KISS rule. Keep it short, keep it simple. In terms of pitching, letters to the editor are easy. Most newspapers will tell you who to send your letters to the editor to. An op-ed piece or a column of any kind is different. It is best if you can get the name of an editor, specific name of an editor. You can often do that on the publication's website. If it's not right there, if you do a little sleuthing and just kind of Google around, you can easily find it. You can, ask, again, LinkedIn is an amazing resource. If you have a name and a connection, you can ask that way. But if you are pitching an op-ed, the better chance of getting it published is if you know the editor who will read it. Newspapers, especially the larger ones, and magazines, especially the larger ones, get just inundated with letters and op-ed columns, and it's very easy for them to get tossed aside by someone who screens them. So the better you can focus it on a specific person, the more prone you will be to getting someone to really read it. I also want to mention that you don't have to get published in a newspaper or on a website. You can publish yourself, and a lot of people are doing this, and it's a very good way to raise your profile. You can self-publish on LinkedIn or on Medium. You can write a column on your feelings about a particular issue that you feel strongly on and publish it yourself. But take as much care with that as you would with a letter to an editor or an op-ed that you're pitching, because these are very visible platforms. And if your settings are such that the public can read them, people are going to read them. And so you've got to be super careful about what you say. You don't want to, you don't want to put yourself out there in a public forum in a way that can negatively reflect on the professional self that you're trying to convey. But self-publishing is really a great way to kind of raise your profile and to get to position yourself as an influencer or a thought leader. So I really think if you want to be an advocate and use your writing for advocacy, you really should focus on ways you can get your work out there beyond the sort of traditional ways. So I think that wraps it up. So I just wanted to share some words that writers live by. This is, I'm sure many of you came across the Strunk and White elements of style in writing classes in college. But this is kind of saying that what we've said again and again. Vigorous writing is concise. A sentence should contain no unnecessary words, a paragraph no unnecessary sentences, for the same reason that a drawing should have no unnecessary lines and a machine no unnecessary parts. This is William Zinsner, another writing instructor. Look for clutter in your writing and prune it ruthfully. Be grateful for everything you can throw away. Re-examine each sentence you put on paper. Is every word doing new work? Can any thought be expressed with more economy? Is anything pompous, pretentious, or faddish? Are you hanging on to something useless simply because you think it is beautiful? Simplify, simplify. That's the basis of the KISS rule. And finally, this is a quote that writers hear a lot. I hate to write, I love having written. It's been attributed to so many different people, Dorothy Parker, Gloria Steinem. I don't know who said it, but the process of writing is not an easy one for most writers. It's tough, and even writing something that sounds simple takes a lot of hard work. But the process, the sort of end point of having written something can be very satisfying. So if you find writing, painful and onerous, just remember, nobody really likes it. I mean, there probably are people who like it, but most people find it really hard work, even people who have been writing for their entire professional careers. So don't expect it to come easily. Work at it, and it really pays off. So I think we're going to go to Q&A now. Is that... So, Christina, do you have the Q&A box open?
Yes, and I want to apologize. I understand my audio has been a little bit choppy. I'm going to try and talk loudly. I've been looking for headphones. My house is a disaster. So I'm going to do the best I can and maybe over-rely on Mary if you guys are having a hard time hearing me. Let me see here. How do you balance writing short and concise with making sure your voice and personality shines through? I find that these are often at odds with my writing style. I think that's a good question. It's something that Mary touched on, I think, it depends on the kind of writing that you're doing. And I think a lot of the time when you're trying to think about it too much, you really don't need to. If you write in the way that is natural for you, in a way that's clear, your personality will come through, and to the degree that you need it to. And those things are not as important when you're writing in a professional way. Would you add anything to that, Mary?
I'm sorry, Christina. I was focusing on looking at the question, so I missed your answer. So
it was just about how do you balance your personality with being short and simple.
Yeah, I think I tried to address that. I do think you shouldn't worry about your personality coming through. It will. Writers who sort of put a lot of energy into their voice tend to overwrite. If you just write in a way that feels comfortable and authentic, that's your voice. So I would focus on that. I see a question here that is a good one. Is the use of contractions in emails okay? And I would say, and Christina may have a different thought, but I would say absolutely. I mean, contractions are conversational. I even think they're fine in cover letters and formal writing. I mean, there's nothing about a contraction that feels shortcut or sloppy in any way. I think contractions are fine, as long as you're using them correctly. Yeah,
and I would agree with that. I think that even though it's professional, you still want to be conversational and sound like yourself. And most people use contractions pretty freely, so I would not overthink that too much. I see a question here that's a good one. During the time of COVID-19, most communication's been moved to digital and tone can be easily misinterpreted. What are some tips to maintaining a polite but fair tone and not falling into the realm of being passive aggressive? I think that it's tricky with email. Sometimes even the most innocuous, well-intended email can be read in a way that people wasn't what the sender meant, and there's only so much of that you can control. So I think trying to be as polite and clear about things as possible. There's certain phrases people use that, like, I personally find, like, thanks in advance kind of annoying, like, because or this must have fallen to the bottom of your inbox, and certain things where it's just like the person's saying something trying to sound nice, but also, like, there's a little text to it. So I think the more just clear you can say, like, I'd like to, bring this to your attention again, or whatever it may be. And also, even though we are all at home, you can still pick up a phone, you can still get on a Zoom call. There's certain conversations that are still better to have where you can hear your tone of voice. And I would just think about what kind of a conversation would you not send an email if you were in the office, because you wouldn't want it to be misinterpreted. You wouldn't want it to be forwarded to the wrong people, and try to make that into a phone call or a Zoom call or another way that you can connect. Anything else on that, Mary?
No, I think you covered it. I see another interesting question. Is humor a good thing? Humor is tough, because what's funny to you could be offensive to me, or could be silly to me. Humor is probably one of the toughest forms of writing, because so many people have different senses of what's funny, what's clever, what's snarky. You've got to be careful. And I think in professional formal writing, you want to avoid humor. I mean, there's plenty places where you can use humor in your writing. But in terms of the type of plain writing that we're talking about, I think you want to avoid anything that could be misconstrued or misread or misinterpreted. You really want to focus on just communicating your idea. Trying to be clever is risky. So I would say I just would hold the humor for some other occasion. And there was another similar question, like, how do you convey warmth if you're writing in a very formal way? I wouldn't worry about that so much. You don't want to sound standoffish and pretentious, and that's why we say don't use fancy words when simple ones will do, and don't use jargon. But you don't really need to sound warm. I mean, you need to sound sincere. You need to sound authentic. You need to, you don't want to sound overly formal, but you want to sign and have a greeting, hi, so-and-so. Do you address the person by a first name or last name? I mean, that it's so variable. I think it's better to be cautious and make it a Mr. or Ms. or Doctor if you don't know the person. So it might be, hi, Dr. Jones, or hi, Ms. Smith, but not just hi, Tom, if you have no idea who the person is. You don't know. Different people have different sensibilities. Nobody is going to fault you for calling them Mr. or Ms. when they're more comfortable being called by their first name. And then your sign off. I mean, some people might sign off with cheers or best regards, or sincerely feels a little dated to me, but a sign off that feels comfortable to you and authentic to you. Maybe you won't say later, or something too colloquial, but just something that feels professional and comfortable and authentic to who you are.
All right, I think we're gonna need to wrap up in a minute or so, but I'm looking through the question box, and I couldn't resist the one on what's your preferred style manual. It's kind of a word nerd question. We use the AP style manual at AAUW. We have some variations on that. That's the one that most journalists use, and that's the style guide that I think is the most consistent with what we're talking about in terms of plain writing. The Chicago manuals of style is also good. That tends to be used more in academia. And we use that when we do formal reports. Our citations are in that format. One of the things I really like about the AP style guide is that it evolves. Every year there's new entries for ways that language is evolving. There's new thinking around capitalization of the word black, for example. There's the use of the singular they in some circumstances, and an acknowledgement of the way people talk about gender is changing, and ways that we use language. And so every year they come out with new guidelines that I think are really fun and interesting, because it's also useful, and going back to the idea of being respectful of people, you want to get inclusive as you possibly can, and so that's a good resource for doing that. Anything to add, Mary?
No, I think you covered it. And there's so many great questions. I wish we had time to answer them. One that jumped out at me is, how does professional writing differ from academic writing? Never having been in academia, I don't really know the values of academic writing, but I do think, just having read a lot, that the best academic writing is the most simple, plain, straightforward. I think a lot of people who write scholarly stuff tend to overwrite or try too hard to sound authoritative. And the really best academic writers that you see published in the Atlantic or in the New York Times are ones who can write in a really plain, accessible style, because really, at least in the professional world, you're writing to make your ideas understood. That is your number one goal, to engage your reader and to communicate what you're trying to communicate. So I think we should turn it back over to Nakia, and it's been great, great hearing all your questions, or reading all your questions, and really glad that we had the opportunity to do this.
Thanks so much, Mary and Christina. That was a really great session. Thank you, everyone, for joining us tonight. I hope that you guys found the session helpful. Sorry we went a little over our time, but thanks for hanging on with us. We'll continue to host these free professional development programs, but just remember that we're a nonprofit, so we do need your support to keep these going. So if it hasn't popped up already, when the webinar closes, our donation page will pop up in your browser. So we'll hope you'll consider being a part of the Equity Network by making a contribution to AAUW. We're grateful for whatever you're able to afford at this time. And also stay tuned for a brief survey and more information on upcoming programs that I'll send to you all tomorrow. Again, I appreciate you all joining us. Again, it may not always feel that way, but we're in this together, so please stay safe, stay home as much as you can, and I hope you'll tune in again for future Equity Network webinars. Everyone have a good night.
Thanks, everyone.
Thanks.